EPICO es como CEN, como el Conservative Environmental Network, como OIKOS, una think tank dedicada a temas de medio ambiente y sostenibilidad. EPICO quiere decir en alemán algo así como protección y sostenibilidad del environment, una cosa así, es un acrónimo, pero EPICO suena muy bien. Y entonces, aquí, si he entendido bien, el enfoque de Bernd va a ir también, por mucho lo que ha dicho Sam, pero haciendo hincapié en las fuerzas del mercado, que se deje innovar, que se ayude a innovar, que no se pongan tabas y cosas de esas. Y yo creo que es lo que vamos a escuchar ahora. Y Bernd, you have the chat.
Thank you very much, Tom. Señoras y señores, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the kind invitation to Madrid. I'm very happy to be here, since I think that the cause that liberal conservative actors, liberal conservative thinkers join forces in the combat of climate change, and also in the combat for a more effective, a more innovation-oriented and more market-oriented energy and climate policy is very important, more important than ever with regard to the current crisis. Furthermore, it really is great to see that an organization like OIKOS is emerging in Spain and also has the mission to drive the debate in this direction. And I think this is especially encouraging, since Spain has a lot of potential to become an innovative forerunner when it comes to the energy transition and to achieving net zero. So what I would like to do today is a bit different from what Sam has done. I would like to share with you a few points from our agenda towards a more market and innovation-based energy and climate policy. And of course, I'm very much interested to get to know your opinion and discuss them. And maybe that might also provide some inspiration for the upcoming agenda of OIKOS, to which I'm very much looking forward. Before I jump right in, allow me a few remarks on EPICO so that you know who we are, what we do. So we are also a fairly new organization. We exist since 18 months now. We are independent, we are a non-profit think tank, and we are developing concepts to reach net zero for and with politicians. This brings me to the second function that we are carrying out. We also work as a network, bringing together key actors from different sectors. And the very core of this network is our advisory body, which is composed of leading energy and climate politicians from different parties. The chairman is the vice chairman of the CDU in Germany, Andreas Jung, arguably the leading figure when it comes to energy and climate policy from the center right. But furthermore, this advisory body is also composed of CEO and board levels members of different companies from different sectors, for example, the energy sector, also the financial sector, the automotive sector, and the industrial sector, plus NGOs and leading academics in the field. So let me turn now to the question, why do we need a shift in energy and climate policy, and why a shift towards more market and more innovation in Germany and in Europe and beyond? And why is the current energy security situation actually underscoring this need? To answer these questions, I would like to jump in with a quote, and it goes like, being conservative means being at the forefront of progress. This quote is by Franz Josef Strauss. He has been a long-time chairman of the CSU in Germany, and he was also, interestingly, a co-founder of Airbus. What it means translated to energy and climate policy is that protecting the environment, fighting against climate change should not be an absolute priority in the sense that everything else must be subordinated to it, but rather it's the other way around. If we have an energy and climate policy that is based on the dynamics of market and innovation, we have a basis for our welfare, for sustainable growth, and we can tackle CO2 emissions more effectively and along the way reconcile this with the issue of social fairness. However, when you have a look across the political landscape in Europe, you actually find in this very specific approach far too often a gap that has been left by the liberal conservative actors. And we need to close this gap very rapidly, also since this gap is contributing to the energy and climate policy as it stands today, which is in many cases ineffective, which is largely state-driven, and which neglects the potential of innovation to a large extent. So I said before, we are in a situation of crisis. Clearly speaking, we are, I would argue, in a double crisis. On the one hand side, we are in a crisis in terms of supply security, especially in Germany. This is considerable. With regard to our major supplier, Russia. In Germany, we're discussing right now how bad things can actually turn out. We are discussing what kind of recession we might get. And yeah, the debate is yet to be continued, depending on what is going to happen in the Kremlin and also in Berlin. And at the same time, the IPCC report shows us that we are in the decisive phase in our combat against climate change. Since so far, we haven't managed to cut CO2 emissions, really. We only have flattened the curve a little bit, but this is not sufficient. But there is also good news. We are capable of achieving our goal to halve our CO2 emissions by 2030, but only if we act decisively, rapidly, but also with foresight. So we therefore find ourselves at a turning point, so to say, at two levels where a business as usual scenario is not longer an option. So where does this crisis, this double crisis, leave us, and what needs to be done now? We are witnessing currently a lot of measures coming up on the national level, but also on the European level. And frankly, I think these are good measures. The massive expansion of renewable energy, the massive scale up of heat pumps, also the streamlining of the planning and approval procedures, and of course, the endeavor of diversifying our natural gas supplies by LNG. A good and important first step, but I would argue this is not sufficient. We need further steps. And these next steps, they must be focused much more on innovation and on market-oriented approaches. And this is the case for two reasons. First and foremost, they thereby contribute to sustainable growth, which we very much need, especially if we end up in a recession. And secondly, they make a major contribution to a structural security of supply that we will need in the future. If we focus on innovation, the potential is enormous. To state the latest Capgemini study, 802 billion in new gross value added in Europe can be generated, as well as 12 million jobs. Impressive numbers. But at the same time, the International Energy Agency tells us that half of the innovation, half of the technology that we actually need to achieve net zero is not on the market yet. So we have a very long way to go, which we need to go with a lot of endurance. And to stimulate the discussion of the agenda that we might need to achieve this goal, the liberal conservative agenda, so to say, I would like to put forward three hypotheses, which I would like to share with you. First, a renewable energy system must ensure security of supply through more flexibility. What do I mean by that? Of course, it is of utmost importance to increase the share of renewable energy. We need to expand it as much as we can. But this is just the starting point, really, since this does not provide us with security of supply, because the physical reality is that this energy is not available all the time and not necessarily at that time when we need to consume it. So the truth is, the higher the share of renewable energy, the more important gets the question of storages and of flexibility. And arguably, in this field, we have still a lot of work to conduct. For example, one important lever, in my view, is a massive scale up of digitalization technology in order to synchronize much better a more volatile supply with a more flexible demand. Second hypothesis, we need a pragmatic, accelerated hydrogen ramp up for the climate neutral industrialized country. This is actually more important than ever. Now with the supply security situation and also the consequence that we need to phase out of natural gas more rapidly, what is key is to have pragmatic investment along the entire supply chain when it comes to hydrogen. And this investment needs to be conducted by companies, of course. And we need to provide them with a pragmatic framework. What do I mean by pragmatic? Basically, two things that I would like to highlight. First, we should not exclude other forms, what has been said before, of climate neutral hydrogen, such as blue hydrogen or turquoise hydrogen, as long as we do not have sufficient volumes of green hydrogen. Second pragmatic aspect, we need to kickstart the hydrogen turbo, so to say, carbon contracts for difference, which provide investment security for investors so that they can conduct investment at a large scale, especially in the heavy industry where this is much needed. But these are all intermediate steps. So it's very important not to lose sight of the actual goal. The actual goal is a green hydrogen economy and a self-sustaining hydrogen market, something that is far too often forgotten in the discussion. At the same time, we need a broad import strategy for hydrogen. I know that there are voices claiming that we can be self-sufficient on hydrogen and, on the continent, but this is very much misleading. To provide you with one number, if the German federal government expands its electrolysis capacity to 10 gigawatt, which is, according to experts, already quite an ambitious target, this would only be enough to meet about roughly 1/10 of the hydrogen demand of the country in 2030. So this shows you the scale of the challenge that we are currently facing. And third and last hypothesis, probably the most provocative one, prices are part of the solution and not part of the problem. I know that's difficult to understand, especially if you pay the price right now at the gas station, for example. But let me elaborate a little bit on this with regard to CO2 pricing, more specifically. We do already have an emission trading system, so to say, a CO2 price in the industry and energy sector. And this is very important since it provides us with a price signal to invest in climate-friendly technology or to reduce CO2 or to reduce in general the consumption of energy. This is why we need to expand the signal. And I know this is hotly debated right now on the European level, not only on the European level, but especially on the European level. But we need to expand the signal to the mobility and also to the heating sector. But what is also important to understand that this is not one single measure, which it needs to be supplemented with a broader policy mix. And this broader policy mix needs to focus on social compensation. This is certainly key. And the good thing about expanding the CO2 price signal to other sectors is that this, of course, generates revenues. And these revenues should be used to have some form of compensation, especially for the most vulnerable households, which would ideally take the form of an in capita reimbursement. But what is really important, besides expanding the price signal here, is to have a clear political communication which brings together the two bits, because this is a two-sided coin. On the one side, we need the steering function of a CO2 price signal, and on the other side, we need some form of social compensation. And unfortunately, that's something that's very difficult to communicate, of course, especially in these difficult times. So to sum up, I think we need to develop markets, not undermine markets. We need the CO2 price signal, but this is not sufficient. We also need the state to a certain extent when it comes to accelerating innovation, ramping up innovation, but we also need the state to withdraw from emerging decarbonization markets at one point. And as I said, innovations are key in achieving climate neutrality and enabling growth. And I would also like to highlight the fact that here we really have a huge opportunity when it comes to industrial policy. Countries like Germany, like the UK, and also Spain, they are in a very good starting position to become world market leaders for green technology, for green innovation, and we need to seize this potential. And in order to do so, we need a fair transition. And I already elaborated a little bit on the need for social compensation to ensure this fair transition, but I would also highlight a second point, which is that with an energy and climate policy that is highly inefficient because it's too much state-driven, we don't get as much CO2 reduction out of the euro that we invest as we could. And this is actually socially not fair, because then we have higher costs, which we then need to redistribute among the different social actors. And this is also a form of social unfairness, so to say. So to conclude, I am convinced that we need a pragmatic shift towards more innovation and also keep a market-minded design of our energy markets. And I do think that liberal conservative actors are in the best position to bring the different things that we need now together, which is agenda for sustainable growth, which is a clear focus on net zero, and which is an eye to the social compensation, the social fairness that we need along the way. Thank you very much.